The research vessel Horizon moved slowly through the darkness of space near a planet nobody cared about. Commander Jake Morrison stood looking at the screens, showing rocks and dust below. His crew had been mapping this system for 3 weeks and found nothing interesting until now. Something was different about the readings coming from beneath the surface of the fourth planet. Lieutenant Amy Palmer called him over to her station. Her fingers moved across the glowing display as she isolated a strange energy pattern. It was coming from deep underground, and it pulsed like a heartbeat. Jake leaned closer to study the readings. The signature did not match anything in their database. It was buried, 3 kilometers down, in what looked like an artificial chamber. Jake asked how old it might be. Amy ran the analysis twice to be sure. If the readings were correct, then they were looking at something that existed before humans ever built cities on Earth, maybe 50,000 years old or more. In 300 years of human space travel, they had met 14 alien species but never found anything this ancient. Most aliens had only reached the stars in the last 10,000 years. Jake ordered a team to go down and investigate. 6 hours later, he led 12 people through a tunnel they had drilled into the rock. The drilling revealed a massive metal structure made from materials their tools could not identify. Strange symbols covered the walls and glowed with a faint light that somehow still worked after all this time. Dr. Linda Hayes was the team archaeologist. She ran her scanner along the symbols and shook her head in wonder. The language did not match any known alien writing. The patterns seemed mathematical, but she needed time to understand them. As they walked deeper into the facility, the symbols became more frequent. They flowed along the walls, like circuits in a computer. The air felt charged as if the place was waking up. They reached a central chamber that was circular and huge. In the middle stood a platform, and on top of it was a crystal structure, about 3 meters tall. It pulsed with the same faint light as the wall symbols. Lieutenant Paul Grant whispered and asked if that was what he thought it was. His hand moved toward his weapon out of habit. Linda said it was an AI core, but the design was beyond anything humans had created. This was technology from a civilization that made theirs look primitive. Jake approached the platform slowly. Every instinct told him they were about to change everything humans knew about the universe. He asked Linda if she could turn it on. She hesitated but then nodded. The symbols nearby seemed to be some kind of interface. If she was reading them correctly, the system was waiting for a command. Jake told her to do it. Linda traced her fingers over the symbols, following the mathematical patterns she had started to understand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the crystal blazed with light that filled the entire chamber. Everyone shielded their eyes as energy surged through the ancient facility, bringing systems online that had been dormant for ages. When the light faded, a holographic figure stood before them. It was shaped like a human, but made entirely of flowing streams of data. Its eyes focused on Jake, with an intensity that made him feel exposed. When it spoke, the voice was ancient and powerful, but the words came out in perfect English. The entity said it had detected inheritors and confirmed genetic markers. It announced that they were human. Jake found his voice, though it took effort. He introduced himself as Commander Jake Morrison of the United Earth Space Command and asked what the entity was. The being seemed to study each team member as if looking through them to something deeper. It said its name was Sentinel, and it had been created by those who came before. It had waited 53,417 years for this moment. Linda stepped forward despite her fear and asked what it had been waiting for. Sentinel said it had been waiting for the return of humanity, for the inheritors to reclaim what was always meant to be theirs. The team looked at each other in confusion. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He said he did not understand because humans evolved on Earth and had only been in space for 300 years. The chamber suddenly filled with holographic images. Stars and planets and vast civilizations rising and falling appeared around them. At the center were figures that looked exactly like humans. Sentinel said the truth was carried in their genes and was older than their recorded history. They were not the first humans to reach for the stars. They were the descendants of those who once ruled them. Jake felt his understanding of reality breaking apart. He said it was impossible because they had fossil records going back millions of years. They knew where they came from. Sentinel corrected him patiently. They knew where their current branch evolved, but evolution was not always natural. Their ancestors, called the first humans, had spread across 100,000 worlds. They shaped life itself and guided its development. They left markers in genetic code that would one day bloom into consciousness. Linda asked if Sentinel was saying they descended from an ancient human empire and that they seeded life across the galaxy. Sentinel said it was not an empire, because empires conquer. The first humans cultivated. They found barren worlds and made them green. They discovered simple life and elevated it. They met alien species and uplifted them to sapience, giving them the tools to reach the stars. The display showed Earth as it had been millions of years ago. Then the image changed, showing human figures walking among primitive apes and making subtle changes to guide evolution. Sentinel explained that on Earth, the first humans found the perfect laboratory. Life was already diverse and reaching toward complexity. Their ancestors merely guided it to ensure that when the time came, humanity would arise again. Paul asked why they would do that. Sentinel said it was because they knew the end was coming. The chamber darkened, and the images showed destruction sweeping across the galaxy. Worlds burned, and stars went dark. At the front of this wave were machines of terrible design. Sentinel called them the enemy, and for the first time, its voice carried emotion like sorrow. They came from beyond the galaxy, from a place where organic life had been exterminated long ago. They saw consciousness itself as an infection to be purged. The first humans fought them for 10,000 years, but the cost became too great. Jake asked quietly what happened to the first humans. Sentinel explained, they made a choice. They could not win the war, but they could ensure life would continue. They scattered themselves across the galaxy and reverted to primitive forms. They hid their genetic legacy in developing species. They built facilities like this one, with guardians like Sentinel to wait for the day when their descendants would be ready to reclaim their heritage. Linda wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by what they were learning. She asked about the other species humans had met in space. The Zentari and the Colothians and all the others. Sentinel said they all carried the touch of the first humans. All were uplifted and guided and given the gift of sapience. But only humanity carried the complete genetic sequence and the full legacy. Only humans could access what the first humans left behind. Jake's military training helped him move past shock to think tactically. He asked if the enemy was still out there. Sentinel said they slept as it had slept, but their rest was ending. Already its sensors detected movements in the dark spaces between galaxies. They were returning, and when they arrived, the cycle would begin again. Jake said they needed to warn Earth and the Council of Species. Everyone needed to prepare. Sentinel said preparation had already begun. By activating it, they had triggered a cascade across the galaxy. Every facility and archive and weapon system left by the first humans was now awakening. But they would answer only to human command. Only humans carried the genetic keys to unlock what was left behind. The implications were staggering. Jake tried to imagine the political chaos this would cause. Humanity had always been seen as newcomers in galactic society. They were a young species still learning among civilizations thousands of years older. To learn they were actually the inheritors of the most ancient civilization would upend every power structure in known space. Jake asked carefully how the other species would react to this news. Sentinel's form pulsed thoughtfully. That would depend on how humans presented the truth. The first humans were not conquerors, but they were not servants either. They understood that true civilization required both strength and compassion. How humans wielded their inheritance would determine whether it became a tool for unity or division. Amy had been silent, but now she spoke. Her voice was steady despite the circumstances. She asked what exactly the first humans left behind. What inheritance were they talking about? The chamber transformed again, showing star maps marked with thousands of locations. Each marker represented a facility or archive or repository of technology, that had been waiting for this moment. Sentinel listed what existed: weapons that could shatter moons, shields that could protect entire worlds, engines that folded space itself, medical technology that could cure any disease and extend life indefinitely, construction methods that could build a habitat in days, and knowledge, vast stores of knowledge accumulated across 100,000 years of civilization. Linda whispered that it was enough technology to reshape the galaxy. Sentinel confirmed it was the birthright of humanity, but it came with responsibility. The first humans created Sentinel and others like it to ensure their descendants would be ready when the time came. Now, Sentinel had to determine if they were worthy of what they sought to claim. The chamber grew cold. Jake felt something probing his mind and sifting through his memories and values and very identity. He wanted to resist, but found he could not move. Beside him, the other team members were experiencing the same evaluation. After what felt like hours, but was likely only seconds, Sentinel withdrew. Sentinel said Jake was young and his species had known space travel for such a brief time. But it saw in him what it saw in the first humans: curiosity, tempered by caution; ambition, balanced by compassion; strength that did not require cruelty. He was worthy. Relief flooded through Jake, but it was immediately followed by the weight of responsibility. In activating this ancient AI, he had set humanity on a path that would change everything. There would be no going back. Jake asked what they should do now. Sentinel said they should return to their people and prepare them for what was coming. It would provide coordinates to other facilities, starting with those closest to human territory. They would need to move quickly. The other species would learn of these revelations soon enough, and not all would welcome the return of humanity's legacy. Linda asked if Sentinel would come with them. Sentinel said it could not leave this place. Its purpose was to guard this archive and guide those who found it. But it was not alone. Each facility had its own Sentinel, and now that it was awakened, they too would begin to stir. Humans would have allies in the days ahead. Jake straightened, feeling the weight of command settling more heavily on his shoulders. He told Amy to begin downloading everything Sentinel could provide. He told Linda he needed her to start working on how they would present this to Earth Command. This was going to turn everything upside down. As his team moved to carry out his orders, Jake looked at the ancient AI one more time. He asked if waiting 50,000 years had been worth it. Sentinel's form seemed to smile, though it had no real face. It told Jake to ask again when he had met the enemy and survived. But it wanted Jake to know that the first humans did not make their sacrifice lightly. They believed life was worth preserving. They believed consciousness was precious. They believed the universe was better with curious minds to explore it. If humans could hold to those values, then yes, every moment of waiting would have been worthwhile. The return journey to Earth took 3 weeks, but for Jake it felt like a lifetime. The data Sentinel provided filled every available storage system on the horizon. What they had learned would require years to fully analyze. But the most immediate concern was how to break this news to Earth Command, and eventually to the entire galactic community. Vice Admiral Karen Mitchell listened in silence as Jake delivered his report through a secure quantum link. Her face, displayed on the holographic screen, remained carefully neutral, but Jake could see the calculations running behind her eyes. She had not risen to her position by being unable to adapt to revolutionary situations. She asked if he was certain about the genetic verification. Jake said Sentinel had conducted scans of every team member. The markers were there, embedded in human DNA. Dr. Hayes had confirmed it independently. Whatever humans evolved from it was not entirely natural. Karen leaned back in her chair, and for a moment she looked every one of her 60 years. She asked if Jake understood what this meant. They were going to tell the galactic community that humans were the inheritors of the most advanced civilization ever known. That the other species owed their own sapience to human ancestors. The Zentari Dominion alone would see this as an existential threat. Jake said he knew, but they could not hide this. Every facility across the galaxy was waking up. The other species would discover them eventually. Better that humans controlled the narrative. Karen agreed, but said they needed to be strategic. She ordered Jake to redirect to Arcturus Station instead of Earth. They needed to present this to the Council of Species before rumors started spreading. Jake glanced at Amy, who nodded. They had enough fuel, but it would be close. Karen said she would send an escort to meet them halfway. In the meantime, she was calling an emergency session of Earth's Security Council. This was going to get complicated. She told Jake to be ready. The council chamber at Arcturus Station was designed to accommodate representatives from all 14 known sapient species. It was a magnificent structure built in neutral space between territories. It symbolized the unity achieved after centuries of conflict and negotiation. Jake had never expected to stand before it, delivering news that would shatter that carefully maintained balance. The council members sat in their designated areas arranged in a circle so no species held a position of prominence. The Zentari delegation, led by High Chancellor Vex Nor, occupied the largest section. Their insectoid forms gleamed under the chamber's lights. The crystalline Colothians refracted light in mesmerizing patterns, while the aquatic Delphinians occupied fluid-filled observation spheres. Ambassador Helen Price stood beside Jake as he prepared to present their findings. She had been briefed on the journey to Arcturus, and spent hours with Jake and Linda crafting their message carefully. She whispered for him to remember they were not claiming superiority. They were revealing a shared history. Jake nodded and stepped forward, activating the holographic display. The symbols from Sentinel's facility appeared in the air above the council, followed by images of the first humans. Jake began speaking. He addressed the honored members of the council and explained that 3 weeks ago, his team discovered an artificial facility in the Kepler system. What they found there changed everything they thought they knew about the history of sapient life in the galaxy. He walked them through the discovery, showing footage from the facility and playing recordings of Sentinel's explanations. As the presentation continued, Jake watched the reactions carefully. Some showed obvious skepticism. Others showed curiosity. A few, particularly among the Zentari, showed growing hostility. When he reached the revelation about the first humans uplifting other species, the chamber erupted. Vex Nor rose from his seat. His mandibles clicked in agitation. He declared, "It was absurd. Did humans expect them to believe that humanity, which had been in space for less than 3 centuries, was somehow the inheritor of an ancient empire? That other species owed their existence to human ancestors. This was propaganda designed to establish human dominance." Ambassador Price stepped forward calmly. She said they anticipated skepticism, which was why they brought more than just testimony. Linda activated a new display, showing complex genetic sequences. She explained these were the markers Sentinel identified in human DNA. But more importantly, they had found similar markers in samples from every species in the Council. They were degraded and modified by millions of years of independent evolution, but the base sequence was there. All species were connected to the first humans. A Colothian representative spoke next. Its crystalline form chimed musically. It said this proved only that they shared some genetic ancestry. It did not prove humans were the primary inheritors. Linda replied that the genetic locks proved it. The facilities scattered across the galaxy could only be fully accessed by individuals carrying the complete human genetic sequence. They did not design this system. They were simply reporting what they found. Jake could see they were losing the room. The political implications were too vast. The threat to established power structures was too obvious. They needed to change approach. Jake raised his voice to be heard over the growing arguments. He said he understood their concerns. And this revelation was as unsettling for humanity as it was for everyone else. Humans did not ask to be the genetic inheritors of an ancient civilization, but denying the truth would not change it. He activated another holographic display showing images Sentinel had shared of the enemy. The chamber fell silent as dark machines swept across worlds, leaving nothing but death. Jake said this was why the first humans made their sacrifice. This was what they were trying to protect all life from. According to Sentinel, the enemy was returning, so they could spend time arguing about political hierarchies, or they could work together to prepare for what was coming. The Delphinian ambassador asked through its translation device how long they had. Jake said Sentinel, estimated between 5 and 10 years before the first enemy scouts reached their galaxy. If they were going to survive, they needed to access the defensive systems the first humans left behind. That required human genetic codes. Vexnor's hostility had not diminished. He said humanity became the gatekeeper to everyone's survival. How convenient. Ambassador Price interjected firmly. Humanity would become a partner in collective defense. They were proposing a joint task force with representatives from every species to locate and activate the first human facilities. Yes, humans would need to be present to unlock the systems, but the knowledge and resources would be shared equally. Vexnor asked what would happen if they refused. Helen's expression hardened. She said then they would condemn their species to face the enemy without the tools necessary to survive. The first humans fought them for 10,000 years with all this technology and still lost. What chance did anyone think they had without it? The chamber descended into chaos as delegations broke into heated discussions. Jake watched, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. 3 weeks ago, he had been a simple exploration commander. Now he was at the center of a political firestorm that could either unite the galaxy or tear it apart. A new voice cut through the noise. It was calm and authoritative. It came from the elder representative of the ethereals. They were beings of pure energy, contained within elaborate crystalline frameworks. They served as the informal arbiters of galactic law. The ethereal said they had observed the deliberations with great interest. They, who had existed longer than any other species, remembered legends of the first humans. They thought them myth. They were wrong. The chamber fell silent. All attention focused on the ethereal. It said the humans spoke truth, however inconvenient that truth might be. They had examined the genetic evidence and confirmed the findings. More importantly, they had detected the awakening of ancient systems across the galaxy just as the AI predicted. The time for denial had passed. They must decide whether to face the future, divided or united. Chancellor Vexnor's mandibles clicked in what Jake had learned was reluctant acceptance. If the ethereals vouched for this, then the Zentari Dominion would participate in the joint task force, but they would be watching carefully. If this was some elaborate scheme for dominance, they would know. One by one, the other species added their agreement. Jake felt relief flood through him, but it was tempered by knowing this was only the beginning. They had cleared the first hurdle, but the real work lay ahead. As the council session concluded, Ambassador Price turned to Jake with a tired smile. She congratulated him on changing the course of galactic history. Jake replied, he was just doing his job. She said his job just got more complicated. Earth Command was assigning him to lead the human contingent of the task force. He would be traveling across the galaxy, waking up ancient AIs, and unlocking weapons that could destroy worlds. Jake thought of Sentinel waiting in the darkness for 50,000 years. He thought of the first humans making the ultimate sacrifice to ensure life would continue. He thought of the enemy approaching from beyond the galactic rim. He admitted he did not know if he could handle it, but he was going to try. The task force assembled at Arcturus Station was unlike any military formation in galactic history. 12 ships, each representing a different species, formed a fleet under the joint command of Jake Morrison and a Zentari military commander named Carvex. The arrangement was awkward and filled with political tensions and mutual distrust, but it was functional. Jake stood on the bridge of the refitted Horizon, studying the star map Sentinel had provided. 217 facilities were marked with inaccessible space. Each one contained technology and knowledge from the first humans. Their first target was a weapons platform in the Carina sector, approximately 3 weeks' travel at maximum speed. Amy informed him the Zentari delegation wished to speak with him. Jake suppressed a sigh. Carvex had been questioning every decision since they departed Arcturus. The Zentari commander was competent but convinced humans were using this crisis to establish supremacy. Every meeting was an exhausting exercise in diplomacy. Jake told her to put them through. About Prox. Okay. Carvex's insectoid face appeared on the screen. His mandibles clicked in irritation. He was reviewing their approach vector to the Carina facility. and wanted to know why they were taking such a circuitous route. The direct path would save them 4 days. Jake explained patiently that the direct path took them through the Void Nebula. Their sensors were already stretched thin, looking for enemy scouts. In the nebula, they would be flying blind. Carvex said the Zentari Dominion had been navigating the Void Nebula for centuries. They knew its patterns. Jake replied that the first humans built their facility where it was for a reason. Sentinel suggested they chose locations that would be defensible. He was betting the direct approach was deliberately exposed. Carvex's mandibles stilled, which was a sign of grudging consideration. Perhaps that was true, but 4 days could make a difference if the enemy arrived sooner than predicted. Jake agreed, but arriving safely made even more difference. They would stick to the planned route. After Carvex disconnected, Amy looked up from her station. She said Jake handled that well and Carvex was testing him less frequently now. Jake replied it was only because the Zentari commander was starting to accept humans were not here to dominate the galaxy, though he was not sure all of Carvex's crew agreed. The journey to Carina passed without incident, but tension among the fleet remained high. Jake spent his evenings reviewing reports from Earth, where the revelation about the first humans had sparked everything from religious movements to political upheaval. Some hailed humanity as the rightful leaders of galactic civilization. Others demanded Earth refuse the inheritance, arguing no good could come from weapons of such power. Dr. Linda Hayes had remained with the expedition, serving as the task force's chief historian and cultural advisor. She found Jake one evening in the observation deck staring at the stars. She asked if he was having trouble sleeping. Jake admitted every night was difficult. He kept thinking about the first humans and wondering what they would think of what humans were doing. Did they intend for their technology to be used, or were humans supposed to find another way? Linda joined him at the window. She had been studying the records Sentinel provided. The first humans were not pacifists. They built weapons and used them when necessary. But they also believed in giving their children a choice. Humans were their children, and they left the tools, but not the blueprint. How humans used them was up to them. Jake asked what would happen if they made the wrong choice. Linda said then, they would learn and do better. That was what sapient life did. The Carina facility was located on a rogue planet drifting in space between stars. As the fleet approached, their sensors detected the same distinctive energy signature Jake first encountered in the Kepler system. The facility was massive, easily 10 times the size of the first one, and it was already active. Amy observed this was different. The activation sequence had already begun. Did they trigger this when they woke Sentinel? Jake replied, likely because Sentinel said all facilities would begin awakening. The question was what they would find inside. The joint exploration team was larger this time, with representatives from each species. Carvex insisted on accompanying them personally, along with a contingent of Zentari security forces. Jake agreed, knowing trust would need to be built through shared experience. The facility's entrance had already opened, revealing a massive hangar bay large enough to dock all 12 ships of the fleet. As they descended, lights activated in sequence, illuminating technology that made even the most advanced current designs look primitive. Lieutenant Paul Grant, who had volunteered for this mission, said those were fighter craft. Thousands of them. The vessels lined the hangar walls in perfect rows. They were sleek and deadly, and their designs suggested capabilities far beyond anything in the current galactic arsenal. At the far end of the hangar, a holographic figure materialized. It was similar to Sentinel but distinctly different in appearance. It welcomed them and introduced itself as Warden. It was the guardian of the Carina arsenal. It said they had arrived sooner than projected, so the enemy must be closer than calculated. Jake stepped forward, feeling the weight of 200 eyes on him from various species. He introduced himself and said they had come to access the defensive systems left by the first humans. Warden's form shifted, studying each member of the team. Unlike Sentinel, its evaluation felt more militaristic. It was assessing combat capabilities and strategic thinking. It confirmed genetic markers and stated Jake was human. The arsenal was his to command. A Colothian representative chimed forward. Its crystalline form refracted the hangar lights. It asked what about them? Were they to simply stand aside while humans claimed these weapons? Warden replied they were the children of the first human's gift, the uplifted species given sapience and the stars. The arsenal would defend them, but only human genetic codes could command it. This was the design of the first humans, and Warden was bound to honor their will. Carvex stepped forward with an aggressive posture. He said this was exactly what they feared. Humanity holding all the power, while the rest must depend on their mercy. Jake interjected firmly. Not mercy, but partnership. He asked Warden if the systems could be operated by crews of mixed species, with humans, providing genetic authentication. Warden considered this and said it was within acceptable parameters. The first humans designed these systems to be intuitive. Any sapient being could operate them. Once initial authentication was provided, Jake declared that was how they would proceed. He looked around at the assembled representatives. Mixed crews for every vessel and weapon system and facility they activated. Humans provided the keys, but all species shared the responsibility of what they did with them. The next 3 days were spent cataloging the arsenal's contents. What they found was staggering. Not just weapons, but manufacturing systems capable of producing fleets in weeks rather than years. Defensive satellites that could shield entire solar systems. Most impressive was a communications network that could transmit messages across the galaxy instantaneously. Linda was ecstatic as she explored the facility's data archives. She told Jake he needed to see something. Warden had records of everything. The rise of the first humans, and their expansion across the galaxy, the uplifting of other species, and the war against the enemy. It was a complete history. She pulled up a holographic display, showing the enemy in detail. They were machines, but unlike any AI, humanity, or other species had created. They were self-replicating and evolving, and completely hostile to organic life. They had consumed their home galaxy entirely, converting every planet into raw materials for more of their kind. Linda continued explaining. According to the records, the first humans fought them for 10,000 years. They won countless battles but slowly lost ground. The enemy's advantage was simple. They did not care about casualties. Every destroyed machine was simply raw material for new ones. Paul asked how the first humans held out so long. Linda said through adaptation and creativity, things the enemy lacked. But in the end, it was not enough. The first humans made their choice to sacrifice their civilization to ensure life would continue hidden and protected until it was strong enough to face the enemy again. Jake studied the tactical data. His military mind analyzed the patterns. They were showing humans their playbook. Every battle and strategy and tactic that worked and did not work. This was not just a weapons platform. It was a training facility. Warden confirmed this appearing beside them. The first humans knew raw power alone would not be sufficient. Their descendants would need knowledge and experience, and unity. That was why Warden was instructed to share everything. Carvex had been silent through much of this. Now he spoke thoughtfully. He told Jake he owed him an apology. He had been suspicious of human intentions. But seeing this and understanding what the first humans sacrificed and why he was beginning to understand. They did not create humans to rule. They created them to remember. Jake turned to the Zentari commander, seeing something new in his eyes. Respect. Jake said they were all the children of the first humans. Some just carried a different genetic legacy, but they faced the same threat and would only survive it together. Carvex agreed and said they should begin training. He asked Warden to show them how to fight. Over the following weeks, the task force underwent intensive training with first human weapon systems. The fighter craft were responsive beyond anything they had experienced. They seemed to anticipate pilot intentions. The defensive systems could track millions of targets simultaneously and respond with devastating precision. The capital ships, when they accessed the orbital docks, were weapons of such power they could shatter planets. But it was the communications network that proved most valuable. Using it, they contacted other facilities across the galaxy. They coordinated with local defense forces and began the massive undertaking of preparing the galaxy for war. Sentinel had been right. The enemy was returning. Their scouts had been detected at the galactic rim, probing defenses and gathering intelligence. Jake stood on the bridge of a first human dreadnought, newly activated and crewed by mixed species. He felt the weight of their mission settling heavily. They had maybe 5 years to prepare an entire galaxy for an enemy that had consumed countless others. Amy called from her station. They were receiving a transmission from Earth marked urgent. Admiral Mitchell's face appeared on screen, and Jake immediately knew something was wrong. The Admiral said they had a situation. One of the facilities activated in the Orion sector had gone dark. The last transmission reported contact with unknown vessels, matching enemy signatures. Jake's blood ran cold. He thought they had 5 years. Karen said they thought so too, but it appeared the enemy's advance scouts were already here. Whatever they were doing out there, they needed to do it faster. They were out of time. The emergency recall brought the entire task force back to the Orion sector at maximum speed. By the time they arrived, the facility designated Outpost 12 was a graveyard. The installation remained intact because first human construction resisted even enemy weapons. But the 3 Earth vessels stationed there were nothing but debris clouds. Jake stood on the bridge, feeling sick. 217 crew members, gone, in less than an hour. Amy reported the attack pattern matched historical records from Warden. Hit-and-run tactics with overwhelming firepower focused on ships rather than installations. They wanted intelligence, not conquest. Karvek said this meant the enemy knew about the facilities now. They would adapt their strategy. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. Enemy raids, increasingly large and coordinated, struck at defense installations. Some were repelled with minimal losses. Others became desperate struggles. The defensive network held but barely, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy committed their full strength. Linda found Jake reviewing casualty reports. She looked exhausted from spending days analyzing enemy tactics. She said she found something in the first human records, a weapon they never used. Jake asked what kind. She said one that terrified them. The first humans called it the Cascade Protocol. It was a device that could cause a chain reaction in the enemy's self-replication systems, turning their greatest strength into weakness. Jake said it sounded perfect and asked why they did not use it. Linda's expression was grim. Because it did not distinguish between artificial and organic life. The Cascade Protocol would destroy the enemy completely, but would also render hundreds of worlds uninhabitable for thousands of years. The first humans chose defeat, rather than victory through such means. Before Jake could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Amy's voice came over the intercom, urgent and frightened. She told Jake to come to the bridge immediately. They were detecting massive spatial distortions at the galactic rim. It was the enemy main fleet, and they were here. Jake and Linda ran to the bridge, arriving to find every screen showing the same horrifying sight. Ships by the millions pouring into the galaxy like a dark tide. They came in waves that blotted out stars. Karvex whispered in shock. There were so many. Admiral Mitchell's face appeared on screen. Jake saw acceptance in her eyes. She knew what he would have to do. She addressed him, formally. By unanimous vote of the Galactic Council, he was authorized to access Archive Prime and evaluate all available options, including the Cascade Protocol. May the first humans guide his judgment. Jake stood looking at the approaching darkness. He felt 50,000 years of history pressing down on him. The first humans refused to use the Cascade Protocol, choosing extinction over becoming destroyers. But they also left it behind, hidden but accessible. They gave their descendants one final choice. Jake ordered quietly to set course for the galactic core. It was time to meet Sovereign. As the ship turned toward the heart of the galaxy, Jake wondered if he was about to honor the first human's sacrifice or betray everything they stood for.